"You're not wearing a tie." That was the first thing Evelyn Hartman said when she opened the door to her penthouse and found a man standing there with calloused hands, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a little barefoot girl clinging to his side. The man blinked slowly, like her words were filtering through molasses. "No, ma'am," he replied, voice low, calm, unmistakably Southern. "But I brought a harmonica and a first aid kit. Figured one of 'em might be useful." She stared. Not at the harmonica, which peeked from his chest pocket like some antique badge of sentimentality. Not even at the heavy work boots tracking invisible dust onto her marble floor. No, she stared at the child. A tiny girl with auburn curls, bare feet, and wide, unblinking eyes. She held something in her small hand, blue and glinting. A string of beads. "I asked for a butler," Evelyn said flatly, her eyes narrowing. "Not this." The man nodded slowly. "Name's Caleb Monroe. I clean floors, fix things that hum when they shouldn't, and cook a decent stew. This here's Mira. She doesn't say much, but she's better at reading a room than most men I've met in board meetings." "I didn't request a family," Evelyn snapped. Caleb's face didn't change. "I didn't request to be born with a wrench in my hand and a daughter I can't leave alone in an apartment building with mold and thin walls. But here we are." There was silence. Not awkward, not even uncomfortable, just thick, the kind of silence that settles over people when something irreversible has just happened. Evelyn Hartman, CEO of Hartman Capital, known across the eastern seaboard as the woman who never blinked. Once. "Why are you even here?" she asked, arms folding tighter across her linen blouse. "You checked the urgent care box when submitting the request to the staffing agency," Caleb replied. "Penthouse recovery. Post-op. No elevator access to staff floor. 24-hour assistance. You wanted a butler. The agency sent a human." He gently nudged Mira forward. The little girl extended the string of blue beads in her hand. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just lifted her offering like a tiny oracle. "What is this?" Evelyn asked, not reaching for it. "She calls them mood beads," Caleb said. "Color tells you how she's feeling. Blue means she's calm, safe. I didn't ask how she feels." "No, ma'am, but she noticed how you feel. That landed differently." Evelyn's breath caught barely. Her hip throbbed in the brace beneath her slacks. Her spine screamed from standing longer than the doctor recommended. The pain meds had worn off hours ago, but she hadn't wanted to seem weak when the agency sent their elite domestic candidate. Instead, they sent this man with sun-creased eyes and a child who spoke in color-coded crafts. She wanted to slam the door, call the agency, demand someone who wore cufflinks and used words like Madame and Terrine. Someone who didn't look like he'd spent the morning fixing a boiler in the Bronx and the afternoon changing his daughter's clothes in a truck stop restroom. Instead, she stepped aside. 2 weeks, she said, not looking at either of them. "I need help until I'm mobile. You sleep in the back room. No clutter, no music, no children in the common areas." She didn't wait for agreement. She turned, limping back into the sunlit space with its floor-to-ceiling windows and silence more expensive than most people's mortgages. Caleb followed silently. Mira didn't. She walked to the window, knelt, and began to line up the blue beads on the glass ledge, arranging them like little constellations. The first hour passed with little more than movement and observation. Caleb unpacked silently in the small utility room off the kitchen. He found the laundry chute, the water filter, the faulty cabinet hinge Evelyn had long since stopped noticing. Mira sat in the same spot by the window rearranging beads like a silent ceremony. Evelyn lay on the long couch trying to focus on a spreadsheet while her pain flared and her jaw tensed from too many unsaid thoughts. "You were supposed to be invisible," she muttered aloud. Caleb, adjusting a crooked lampshade, glanced at her. "I don't do invisible," he said, "but I do quiet. That had to help?" She didn't answer. That night, Evelyn woke with a start. The penthouse was dark, quiet, too quiet. A ripple of pain moved down her leg, sharp and sudden. Her water bottle was empty. She cursed under her breath and reached for the cane. It wasn't there. She bit back a groan, trying to push up from the couch when a shadow appeared. "You all right?" Caleb's voice, low and non-invasive, came from the hallway. "I don't need help," she said, teeth gritted. "You look like you need water. That's not the same." He walked past her, unfazed, opened the fridge, poured water into a glass, and placed it gently on the end table beside her. Then he placed the cane back within reach. "I clean. I cook, and sometimes I make people feel seen when they'd rather be invisible," he said almost to himself. "I didn't ask for that either." Caleb gave her a small smile, tired but kind. "No, ma'am. But sometimes what we ask for ain't what we need." She couldn't sleep after that. Not because of the pain, not even because of the stranger in her home. It was the girl, the barefoot child now asleep on a pallet of blankets in the utility room, who haunted her. Evelyn had met dozens of kids at charity galas, shiny, precocious, staged. But this one, this Mira, she'd walked into a cold marble penthouse and left warmth in the window. No words, no demands. Just a single string of blue beads and a quiet that didn't ask for permission to exist. The next morning, Evelyn woke up to the smell of cinnamon. And coffee. Real coffee. The kind that took time. She shuffled toward the kitchen and found Caleb humming lowly under his breath spatula and one-hand harmonica peeking from his pocket. He looked like a man who'd spent his life in kitchens that smelled like family and sorrow, and maybe one too many breakfasts for dinner. On the counter sat a plate of toast eggs and sliced apple with peanut butter, a presentation so humble it could have been insulting. Instead, it felt safe. "You made food. I noticed you skipped dinner, and the meds say, take with food." Evelyn stared at the plate. "Still not wearing a tie," she murmured. Caleb shrugged. Didn't seem like the kind of house that needed one. He turned just as Mira walked in, clutching a new strand of beads. This time they were pale yellow. "What does that mean?" Evelyn asked before she could stop herself. Caleb glanced at the beads, then down at his daughter. He smiled. "Hope." The second morning, Evelyn found herself waking not to her pain, but to the sound of small feet. Not running, not stomping, just padding. Bare, soft, deliberate. She lifted her head to find Mira kneeling by the tall window again, the morning light catching her curls like flame in glass. The girl was threading a new line of beads greens this time, with a single silver one placed right in the center. It wasn't just a craft. It was ritual. There was something reverent about the way she did it, like she was building meaning one bead at a time. Evelyn blinked. Her first instinct was to correct her. Children and tiny pieces didn't belong near $8,000 Persian rugs, but she didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, she watched. Watched how Mira held each bead up to the light before slipping it onto the string. Watched how her fingers worked quickly but carefully. This wasn't a hobby, it was a language. And Evelyn Hartman, fluent in 6 financial dialects and the brutal grammar of corporate power, realized she didn't speak this one at all. She cleared her throat gently. Mira didn't look up. "You always do that in the morning?" Evelyn asked, keeping her tone as neutral as possible. No answer. Caleb's voice drifted in from the kitchen. "She makes one every day, sometimes 2. Each strand is different. Colors mean feelings. Silver in the middle means she's trying to hold it together." Evelyn turned her head, surprised he'd heard her from that far. He was rinsing a frying pan, the sleeves of his threadbare flannel rolled up. His arms looked strong, not gym strong, but built through decades of carrying, too much strong. "And she doesn't talk?" Evelyn asked. Not with words Caleb said simply, but she listens more than most people who never stop talking. She's 6. He nodded. Was she born that way? There was a pause. The kind that stretches just long enough to hint that you've stepped onto ground not yet earned. Some things changed after her mom passed. Caleb said, eyes still on the sink. Others were always there, just quiet, like her. Evelyn looked back at Mira. The girl was now tying off the end of the strand with a perfect little knot, then gently hanging the finished piece on the window latch. It joined 3 others, forming a loose arc across the glass like a mood barometer made of color and thread. Where'd she learn that, Evelyn asked. Nowhere, Caleb said. It's just how she copes. Some folks scream, some folks pray. Mira makes beauty out of beads when the world gets too loud. That line hit Evelyn somewhere she didn't expect. Right in the hollow spot beneath her ribs where lately most things just echoed. Later that day, Evelyn had a follow-up call with the board. She didn't want Caleb in the room. Certainly didn't want Mira nearby, but she couldn't exactly ask them to leave the penthouse. Instead, she retreated to her glass-walled study and closed the door, pretending, as she always did, that transparency was the same thing as control. The meeting was a disaster. Markets were sliding. A deal she thought airtight was leaking at every seam. Someone on the call hinted that the board was considering naming a temporary co-CEO while she recovered. Co-CEO? As if she hadn't built the company brick by brick from her father's shell. As if they hadn't all depended on her judgment for a decade. She ended the call with her lips pressed so tightly together her teeth ached. The moment she opened the door, she nearly collided with Mira, who had been sitting just outside with a new string of beads resting across her knees. They were red. Startlingly red. No silver in sight. What does red mean? Evelyn asked before she could stop herself. Mira looked up, those large owl-like eyes watching her too closely. She says, it means the world's a little angry today, Caleb said gently from behind the kitchen island. But that doesn't mean we have to be. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. She hated that. Hated the way this man spoke like he was narrating the inside of a heart. It was dangerous, unprofessional, disarming in ways she didn't have charts for. I'm not angry, she muttered, heading for the wine fridge. No, ma'am, Caleb said without looking at her. Just disappointed. That's a different kind of red. That evening, Evelyn finally asked the question that had been pressing at the edge of her mind since the first moment they arrived. Why didn't you say, no? Caleb glanced up from where he was tightening a loose cabinet hinge. To what? To this, she said, gesturing around the penthouse. To the job. To bringing your daughter into a place where she's not built to blend in. He wiped his hands on a dish towel before answering. 'Cause I've learned something, he said. Sometimes the places we least belong are the ones that need us most. Evelyn didn't speak for a long time. She just looked at him. Really looked at him. The crow's feet that deepened when he smiled. The quiet strength that radiated even when he was silent. The way Mira curled into his side whenever she got too close to noise or strangers. He wasn't what she'd asked for, but somehow, without asking, he was already shifting something in the air. Before bed, Evelyn limped past the window where the beads hung. She paused. 5 strands now, each a different shape, a different hue. A quiet conversation happening without her. She stood there longer than she meant to. Then, without understanding why, she reached out and gently touched the strand with the silver center. It felt warm, like it had caught sunlight no one saw. From across the room, Mira watched. She didn't smile, but she reached into her pouch, pulled out a new piece of string, and began again. Evelyn Hartman didn't believe in ghosts. Not the white sheet kind, not the rattling chains in the attic, but she believed in the kind that haunted differently, regrets that sat beside you in silence, memories that whistled through a room like wind under a locked door. And tonight, something ghostly stirred her from sleep. It wasn't a nightmare, it was music. Faint, almost unsure of itself. A tune that tiptoed across the air like it wasn't entirely sure it had permission to be heard. She blinked into the dark. No lights, no motion. Just that sound, soft, warbling human. Raw, a harmonica. She eased off the couch with a groan. The pain in her hip protested, but she ignored it, slowly following the music like a thread tugging at her ribs. The melody floated from the kitchen where a single light glowed like a secret. Caleb was sitting at the table, elbows resting on the surface harmonica pressed to his lips. His eyes were half closed. Not asleep, not awake. Just somewhere else. The tune was old. Not familiar like a radio song, but familiar like a memory you never made. It was the kind of music that didn't need words because the man playing it had already lived through what the lyrics would have said. Evelyn leaned against the doorway, unseen. Mira was curled up nearby, asleep under a blanket made of something old and handmade. Her hands still clutched a half-finished strand of amber and cream beads. A single tear-shaped one had rolled from her palm onto the floor. Caleb played for another 30 seconds, then stopped like the melody had nowhere else to go. He set the harmonica down with a care usually reserved for holy things. "That song," Evelyn said softly, finally stepping into the light. "It sounds like it used to belong to someone else." Caleb didn't startle. He looked at her eyes steady but quieter than before. "It did," he said. Her name was Sarah. Evelyn nodded, though she didn't know what to say. "I never learned to read music," Caleb continued. But she could. Played piano like the keys were part of her skin. When she was pregnant with Mira, I used to try to play along just to make her laugh. I was terrible. He gave a dry chuckle barely there. But one day she said, "You don't play it right, but you play it like you mean it." Evelyn's throat tightened. "That melody's mine now. Not because I earned it, but because it's all I've got left that still sounds like her." The silence after was long, not awkward reverent. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "You know, when I was 10, my mother hired a violinist to play at her birthday brunch, one of those private events on the rooftop garden. I wore patent leather shoes and a dress that itched." She smiled faintly. "The violinist played Ave Maria, and I cried. Not because it was sad, because it was too beautiful. My mother told me to excuse myself and get it together." Caleb didn't respond with pity, just listened. Evelyn stepped forward slowly and sat at the far end of the table. "Sometimes I wonder," she said, "if I stopped crying that day and just never started again." Caleb looked at her the way only someone who'd lost more than he ever said out loud could look. "Music has a way of finding what words miss," he said. She nodded once, then let her eyes rest on the harmonica. "Will you play it again?" He raised an eyebrow. "Now, yes, but not something for her," she added, her voice steadying. "Something for now." Caleb hesitated, then picked up the instrument again. This time the song that emerged was different, lighter, still raw, still real. But this one had hope curled around the edges. It made Evelyn think of rain stopping just before dawn, of porch lights left on just in case someone came home, and somewhere between the third and fourth note, her hand found its way to the table. Rested there, open. Mira, half asleep on the floor, stirred and rolled closer, still silent. But she reached out too and placed the lone bead that had rolled away onto Evelyn's palm. It was clear, translucent, barely there. Evelyn stared at it, stunned. "What's this one mean?" she whispered. Caleb glanced down. "Means she sees you." Evelyn closed her fingers around it. The next morning, Evelyn didn't snap when Caleb left a mug on the wrong coaster. She didn't raise an eyebrow when Mira hung a pale green strand on the hallway light switch. She didn't even flinch when she caught her own reflection in the mirror messy bun, no makeup, flannel robe. She looked human. Later, when she passed by the piano in the corner, one she hadn't touched in 5 years, she paused. She pressed a single key. It rang out sharp and clean in the quiet. Mira looked up from her beadwork. Evelyn smiled tentative. "That one's for you." The child tilted her head, then selected a blue bead and rolled it across the floor toward her. That night, Caleb cooked grilled cheese with rosemary and tomato bisque. Simple. Honest. The kind of dinner that didn't need an excuse to exist. "Why the harmonica?" Evelyn asked mid-bite. Caleb took a sip of coffee before answering. "Because it fits in your pocket," he said. "And some days you need to carry the music with you, especially when you've forgotten what home sounds like." Evelyn stared at him. There it was again, one of those sentences that didn't just land, it stayed. "You talk like someone who's read a lot," she said. Caleb smiled. "No, ma'am. I've just buried enough to know what's worth saying out loud." When Evelyn went to bed that night, she carried the clear bead with her. Not out of sentiment, but because for the first time in years she didn't want to be the only thing in the room that knew how she truly felt. And on the windowsill, 5 strands of beads caught the moonlight. Each one different. Each one whispering something no word ever could. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to take the service elevator." Caleb turned, holding a bag of groceries in one hand and Mira's small fingers in the other. His boots had barely cleared the marble lobby floor when the building manager's sharp-suit sharper frown stepped in front of him like a traffic cone with a superiority complex. "The service elevator's out," Caleb said evenly. "Maintenance guy said it wouldn't be fixed until Friday." The man's expression tightened. "Even so, the main lobby is for residents and approved guests. Miss Hartman's temporary arrangement doesn't change building policy." Mira squeezed Caleb's hand. She didn't cry. She never did. But her grip spoke volumes. Caleb glanced down at her, then back up at the manager. "She's recovering from surgery. That makes me approved." And this one, he nudged his chin toward Mira, is quieter than any CEO's Pomeranian I've had to dodge on this marble. A few residents lingered nearby, pretending to be on their phones, their ears clearly tuned in. One woman smirked. Another scoffed. "I'm not going to argue," the manager said, lowering his voice. "But I think you understand what I'm saying." "I do," Caleb replied, voice steady. "You're saying that no matter what job I do or how quietly my daughter walks, we don't look like we belong here." The words landed with quiet force. The manager didn't reply. Caleb didn't push. He just turned and walked toward the elevator with the same steady stride that had carried him through worse. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't, was Evelyn Hartman standing in the far corner of the mezzanine above. She had seen everything, and she said nothing. That night, Evelyn sat at the edge of her bed, one hand on the clear bead Mira had given her days before. It was smooth, cool, weightless, but tonight it felt heavier than usual. She thought about all the boardrooms she'd commanded, all the conferences where people whispered about her shoes, her face, her status. She'd built herself into an empire no one could touch. But she hadn't said a word when a man and his daughter were treated like shadows in a building she owned the lease to. "I am no one's savior," she told herself. Still, she couldn't sleep. The next morning, Caleb was already packing. 2 duffel bags at the door. The harmonica was gone from the counter. Mira wasn't stringing beads. She was sitting silently beside the couch arms wrapped around her knees. "You're leaving?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Caleb didn't look up. "You brought us into your home. Miss Hartman. You've been generous, but we're not a good fit here, and I think we both knew it from the start." Evelyn took a step forward. "You don't get to decide that on your own." Caleb paused. "Don't I?" He turned slowly, finally meeting her gaze. "I'm a janitor. I fix things. I sweep floors. I don't fit in places where people whisper when I walk through the lobby. That's not what I—" "But it is what happened." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "I can fix it." Caleb gave her a look that was more sad than angry. "You shouldn't have to fix it. It shouldn't be broken in the first place." His voice wasn't raised. It was calm, steady, the kind that hits harder than shouting ever could. "You think I didn't notice?" he continued. "When you stood there yesterday and watched them talk down to us like we were smudges on the marble." Evelyn said nothing. "Look," he said softer now, "you've got a good heart. You really do. But hearts don't change people's minds. Not always. And I can't let Mira grow up thinking that being quiet means being invisible." He turned back to his bag. That's when Mira stood up. She walked past both of them, opened the drawer near the window, and pulled out a fresh string of beads. She walked to Evelyn, held it out yellow with a single white bead in the center. "She made that this morning," Caleb murmured. "Yellow means she's trying to be brave. White in the middle means she's not sure who to trust yet." Evelyn knelt slowly, pain flaring through her hip. She took the beads with trembling fingers. "I should have said something," she whispered. Mira didn't reply, but her small hand reached out and touched Evelyn's arm. Just once. Then she walked back to the window and resumed her beadwork, as if saying, "This isn't over, but it's not ruined either." Later that day, Evelyn made a call. a personal one, to the building management company. She used no titles, no threats, only this. His name is Caleb Monroe. His daughter's name is Mira. They are my guests, and if I ever hear that they were treated as anything less again, I will terminate every contract this building is built on. Do you understand me?" There was silence on the other end. Then an immediate trembling yes. She didn't hang up. She ended the call, and, for the first time in a long time, Evelyn Hartman felt like something in her spine had reawakened. That evening she came home with a paper bag tucked under her arm. No assistant, no briefcase, just her. Caleb was in the kitchen washing dishes. Mira was humming soft, tuneless but beautiful in the hallway. Evelyn set the bag down. "Dinner," she said. Caleb turned eyebrow raised. "You cook now, I Uber Eats, but I pick with intention." She pulled out 2 cartons of chicken pot pie and 1 tiny cup of lemon sorbet. "Comfort food," she added. "Apparently I'm trying that." Caleb chuckled once. "You didn't have to." "I didn't," she replied, "but I wanted to." There was a beat of silence. Then she added, "And I called the management." Caleb stopped drying the plate in his hand. Evelyn looked him in the eye. "You were right. I should have said something. So I did." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. "Thank you," he said. Evelyn nodded back. "Don't thank me. Just stay. Both of you. Please." That night, Mira hung a new strand on the window. Blue beads, 2 white ones in the middle and 1 silver. Evelyn looked at Caleb. "What's that one say?" He smiled softly. "She feels safe, curious, and watched over." Evelyn looked back at the strand. Watched over. Maybe that was a new kind of music, one she hadn't learned how to play yet. But maybe, just maybe, she was learning. The ballroom sparkled like a jewelry box someone had shaken open. Chandeliers dripped crystal. Waiters glided across the floor like chess pieces in tailored black. The smell of perfume and fresh-cut peonies hung thick in the air, and the sound of champagne flutes clinking mingled with low laughter and polished introductions. And Mira Monroe was already starting to come undone. She stood at the edge of the room, her hand clenched around the end of her dress, not because she was nervous, but because everything was too much, too loud, too bright, too close. Evelyn hadn't noticed it yet. She was mid-conversation with a hedge fund partner, her smile sharp and strategic. Caleb stood nearby, Mira's coat slung over his arm, eyes never leaving his daughter. He saw it in her first, the way her shoulders crept up toward her ears, the way her jaw tightened. She was trying hard. He leaned down. "You okay, Bug?" She didn't answer, just stared across the room at a flickering wall sconce that wouldn't stop buzzing. Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper. "We can step out." But then Evelyn turned. "There you are," she said, walking toward them. Her dress shimmered like liquid silver under the lights. "They're just about to announce the board restructuring. I'd like you both close. Mira, too. It sends a message." Caleb hesitated. "Evelyn." "It's 5 minutes," she said quickly. "We'll be in and out. Please." Mira glanced up at her father, her fingers now twisted in the hem of her sleeve. Caleb looked down at her. 5 minutes, he repeated softly. She nodded once. And that was the mistake. 2 minutes into the speech, Mira dropped the beads. Not on purpose. She had been clutching a string of soft blue ones, her version of armor, and they slipped. The strand hit the polished marble with a sound that might as well have been a gunshot in the silence between words. Beads scattered. Dozens of them. Rolling like frightened marbles across the floor under heels and designer shoes. Mira froze. Not the kind of stillness that comes from embarrassment. The kind that comes from sensory collapse. Her hands went to her ears. Her breath quickened. Her shoes, borrowed and too tight, had already been kicked off. Her bare feet curled against the cold floor as she dropped to her knees. A quiet gasp rippled across the room. Then whispers. One voice said, "Is she okay?" Another, less kind, said, "Good Lord, who brings a child like that to an event like this?" And then came the one that made Caleb's jaw tighten. Special kids don't belong in spaces like this. It's uncomfortable for everyone. Before Caleb could move, Evelyn was already there. She didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. She dropped to her knees right beside Mira, letting the chilled marble press against her own. Without saying a word, she began picking up the beads, one by one. And then she spoke soft calm, not for the room, but for the girl beside her. "You dropped something beautiful," she said gently. "But it doesn't mean you broke it. Sometimes beautiful things need to fall apart. So we know how much they mattered." Mira's breathing hitched, but she looked at Evelyn. Really looked. Caleb watched stunned as his daughter let Evelyn's hand rest gently over hers. No pulling away, no flinch. Evelyn lifted one of the beads to her lips, kissed it softly, then placed it back into Mira's palm. And then she turned to the room. "She's not broken," Evelyn said clearly, standing slowly, her voice unwavering. "She's overwhelmed. There's a difference." The room went silent. "You want to talk about discomfort," Evelyn continued. "Then let's talk about how uncomfortable it must be to live in a world not built for you, to have to carry your calm around your wrist just to make it through a room like this." She turned, slowly scanning every face. "This child has more courage in her silence than half the board has in a quarterly report." No one moved. No one dared to interrupt. Then Evelyn did something no one expected, least of all Caleb. She took off her heels, right there, in the middle of a multi-million-dollar fundraiser. She dropped them beside Mira and stood barefoot on the cold marble. "She doesn't need to adjust to this world," Evelyn said. "Sometimes the world needs to adjust to her." 10 minutes later, Mira sat in a quiet hallway tucked behind the ballroom. The lights were dimmer, the sound muffled. She was stringing the beads again, her hands steady now. Caleb sat beside her watching. "I thought it was too much," he said quietly. "I should have said no." Evelyn, leaning against the wall opposite, replied, "You didn't fail her. You trusted her. That's what she'll remember." Caleb looked at her eyes softening. "She trusts you now." Evelyn blinked. "That's not nothing," he added. She stepped forward and knelt beside Mira. "You okay if I help?" she asked. Mira nodded and handed her a bead, a single red one. Evelyn looked up at Caleb. "What's this one mean?" He smiled faintly. "Means she's proud." Back inside the ballroom, no one mentioned the interruption. They didn't dare. Instead, they watched Evelyn Hartman walk back in barefoot holding a child's hand. And for once, everyone else felt underdressed. It was the smallest drawer in the penthouse, not the one with the files or the contracts or the expensive pens Evelyn never actually used. This drawer sat at the corner of the hallway console table hidden under a vase of white lilies. Mira found it on a quiet morning when the world hadn't yet asked anything of her. She wasn't snooping, just existing, the way children do when they're comfortable in a space. She tugged the drawer gently. It stuck at first, then gave. Inside was a single photo, worn around the edges, the kind of wear that doesn't come from age but from being touched too often. It was a woman, smiling wide arms around a small girl with tangled curls and blue beads in her hand. The girl was Mira. The woman was not Evelyn. When Evelyn walked in, Mira didn't startle. She was sitting cross-legged in the sunbeam near the window, the photo balanced carefully in her lap. Evelyn froze in the doorway. "That's yours," she said gently. "You're allowed to hold it." Mira looked up, searching Evelyn's face for signs: approval, anger, withdrawal. Finding none, she turned the photo slightly as if offering to share the memory. Evelyn walked over slowly and knelt beside her. "That's Sarah," she whispered. "Your mom." Mira nodded. Evelyn studied the photo more closely now. There was a softness to the woman's face, a light in her smile that seemed to echo in Mira's eyes. She was holding the little girl like she was both fragile and fierce, like the world could try its worst, but she'd never let go. "She looks like she laughed a lot," Evelyn murmured. "She did." The voice came from behind them. Caleb stood in the archway, his expression unreadable. "She laughed like it cost her nothing," he said quietly. "Even when it did." Evelyn looked up at him but said nothing. Caleb came closer, crouching beside Mira, gently brushing a curl from her forehead. She started making bead chains after Sarah passed, he said. That one she's holding was the last one Sarah helped her finish. Evelyn's heart twisted. She never told me. She doesn't talk about that day, Caleb replied, but sometimes she leaves one of those beads in a place that hurts, like a way of saying, I remember you, even if no one else does. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself sitting alone on the balcony, the photo still resting in her hands. She stared at it like it might speak to her, like it might explain something no one else could. Then Caleb stepped out 2 mugs of tea in hand. Mint and ginger, he said, offering one. Good for thinking. Evelyn took it without a word. For a long moment they sat in silence, the city breathing below them. Do you know what it's like to be around someone who makes you wish you were a better person? Evelyn asked suddenly. Caleb didn't answer right away. I do, he said. She's sleeping in your guest room right now. Evelyn smiled the smallest curve of her lips. I thought I knew what healing looked like, she said. Therapy, yoga, expensive retreats in the desert. But that girl... She healed something in me without saying a single word. Caleb looked at her, then eyes steady. She sees what matters, he said. Not because she's broken, but because she knows what it's like to carry sharp edges. Evelyn traced her thumb along the photo's corner. I was 12, the last time someone held my hand just to say, I'm here, she whispered. And I think that morning in the hallway when she gave me that bead, that was the first time in 20 years someone reached for me without expecting something back. Caleb didn't speak. He just listened, because some truths are too tender to echo back. That evening, Mira strung a new strand of beads. She used sky blue white and one translucent green in the center. She handed it to Evelyn with both hands. Evelyn knelt to her level. What does green mean? Mira hesitated, then raised her hand slowly and touched the necklace Evelyn wore. Not the diamonds. The small silver chain tucked beneath. Evelyn pulled it out. It was a locket. Inside a photo of her younger self and her mother. The green bead Mira pointed, then gently tapped her own chest. She thinks you're trying to grow, Caleb translated. Evelyn's eyes burned. Well, she said softly, maybe I am. The next morning, Evelyn went to the corner of the penthouse where the old upright piano stood. She hadn't touched it in years. She dusted the keys. Then, awkwardly, she sat down. Mira padded in quietly and stood beside her. Evelyn lifted the fallboard and pressed a key. A low A. Then another. Slowly, a clumsy melody began to emerge off-key but intentional. Mira didn't laugh, didn't flinch. Instead, she sat beside her and placed a single bead on the music stand, a soft violet one. What's this mean? Evelyn asked, breath-catching. Mira tilted her head, then whispered something so faint it barely existed. Evelyn froze. What did you say, sweetheart? Mira looked up and said, just above a breath, safe. It was her first word in months, and Evelyn couldn't hold the tears back this time. She didn't want to. The rain had stopped just after dawn. It left behind a city washed clean rooftops, still dripping windows fogged with the last breath of the storm. Evelyn stood barefoot on the marble floor of her penthouse watching the light break through the clouds like it was learning to be brave again. Behind her, Caleb knelt by the rusted toolbox he'd carried up that morning. You don't have to fix it, she said, arms crossed, not looking back. He didn't answer right away. Just tightened the belt around his waist and tugged on a pair of work gloves. The glass is cracked, he said simply. When the wind blows hard, it sings like it's mourning something. Evelyn blinked slowly. And you can fix that. I know how to quiet things, he replied. Even when they're broken. The balcony window had been a quiet sore spot since her surgery. The top right panel had a spiderweb fracture small, but enough to make her flinch every time thunder hit. Caleb set to work carefully removing the trim with practiced hands. Mira sat nearby, legs crossed, sorting beads in small, color-coded trays. She hummed softly, no tune, just presence. Evelyn hovered in the doorway. Is this what you used to do? Before janitor shifts and makeshift harmonicas? Caleb chuckled under his breath. Carpentry. Custom interiors. I liked giving people space that felt like theirs, even if they didn't know how to ask for it. She tilted her head. You speak like someone who builds more than cabinets. I used to think every broken thing deserved a second try, he said. Then Sarah died, and for a while I didn't believe in fixing anything. The room quieted. Mira picked up a length of thread, her small fingers weaving shades of blue with precise, patient rhythm. Cerulean, cobalt sky turquoise, one after another, a language without words. Evelyn walked over slowly and crouched beside her. That's beautiful, she whispered. Mira didn't respond, but didn't pull away either. Evelyn studied the emerging pattern. Why blue today? The little girl paused. Then, after a long breath, pointed toward the window. Evelyn followed her gaze. The city was framed in light, now rooftops glowing gold, the skyline crisp and alive. Mira tapped the glass, then gently pressed a bead against the panel Caleb had just cleared. It clung there, stuck with a small dab of clear wax. Then another, and another, until 5 soft blue beads lined the bottom edge of the window like tiny sentinels. Caleb turned and watched in silence. Evelyn's voice cracked. What do the blue ones mean? Mira looked up. For a moment her lip trembled like she might not answer. Then she whispered, barely audible, Blue means someone is waiting for you to come home. The sentence landed with the weight of a piano. Evelyn froze. Her hand instinctively covered her heart. Sweetheart. Mira looked down as if uncertain she should have said it. But Evelyn knelt lower, gently touching her shoulder. Thank you. That's the most beautiful meaning I've ever heard. Caleb stood now, gloves still on, but his hands were shaking slightly. She used to say that to Sarah, he murmured, even when she was too little to understand it herself. After school, when I'd pick her up, she'd hold up the necklace and ask if it was still blue, just to make sure home was still safe. Later that evening, as twilight settled like silk over the skyline, Evelyn stood at the balcony again. The panel was restored clean lines, no cracks, no ghosts. But the real change wasn't in the glass. It was in the row of blue beads Mira had gently pressed across the corner. They shimmered faintly in the dim light, catching reflections of the world outside and maybe of the one inside too. Caleb joined her holding 2 mugs. Chamomile and lemon this time. Nice work today, she said softly. He nodded. You let me fix something. I didn't think it needed fixing, she admitted. Not until it stopped making that noise. He sipped quietly. Most things don't feel broken until silence makes you notice. She turned toward him, then studying his face. The gentle creases at his eyes, the roughness in his jaw, the steadiness that never seemed to waver. Caleb, she said, voice low, I think I've spent most of my life fixing the wrong windows. He smiled faintly. We all do. No, she said, stepping closer. I mean it. I fixed numbers, reports, my body even. But I never fixed the part of me that wanted to feel seen. Until now, I didn't know how. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. Sometimes silence is the answer we've been afraid to hear. That night, Mira fell asleep, curled on the sofa, her tiny fingers still gripping the tail end of her beadwork. The last bead had been green, a soft pale jade. Evelyn carried her gently to the guest room, pulled the blanket up, and kissed the curls atop her head. Then, just before leaving, she turned back and whispered, You're the first person who ever taught me how to stay. The next morning, the sunlight hit the glass in a new way. The blue beads glowed like stars from another language, one made of waiting and hope and the sacred promise that someone somewhere was building a home just by staying. Evelyn pressed her palm to the window, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Evelyn had never been good at waiting. In her world, things happened because you made them happen. Deadlines, mergers, wins, losses, everything on a timeline, everything on her terms. But this wasn't business. This was Caleb Monroe, and he was sitting on the edge of the leather couch, his elbows resting on his knees, head bowed, not in defeat, but in quiet resolve. She had just asked him to stay, not for a night, Not until Mira's bead jar ran out of colors. But stay. Really stay. And he had looked at her with those storm-weathered eyes and said, "Evelyn, I can't." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy, personal, unmistakable. She stood by the kitchen island, now hands clenched around a chipped ceramic mug even though the coffee had long gone cold. Caleb hadn't left yet. Mira was still napping in the guest room, her little chest rising and falling like peace made visible. Evelyn turned. "I meant it," she said quietly. "You two, you feel like family." Caleb didn't move. "That's the problem." Her jaw tightened. "You think that's a problem?" He looked up at her then, and the pain in his voice came out plain. "You live in a place with ceilings that touch the sky. I clean floors for a living." She stepped closer. "I don't care about that. You should." He replied firm, but not cruel. "Because one day you'll remember who you are and you'll hate that I reminded you who I'm not." She shook her head. "No, that's not fair. It's honest," he said. "And maybe unfair things are the only honest ones left." Evelyn sat down across from him. "Let me tell you something," she said, voice lower now. "The night I heard your harmonica, I didn't sleep. Not because I was restless, because I felt safe. For the first time in years. You didn't fix me. You didn't even try. You just showed up and stayed until the music stopped." Caleb swallowed hard but said nothing. She leaned forward. "You ever think maybe this penthouse wasn't built for penthouse people? Maybe it was just waiting for someone who knew how to stay quiet when a child cried, who knew when not to ask questions, who could fix broken glass without making the person who cracked it feel ashamed." Caleb stood, then his hands flexing at his sides. "Evelyn," he said, "I'm not who you think I am. I know who you are," she shot back. "You're the man who brushes beads out of the carpet like they're gold, who hums lullabies to a little girl without using words, who holds grief without letting it leak onto anyone else. That's who you are." He closed his eyes. "You don't know what it's like to be reminded you don't belong. Not every day." Evelyn's voice cracked. "You think I don't know what loneliness feels like in a place like this? I've eaten dinner with gold spoons and empty chairs. I've cried in rooms so expensive they echoed an apology. Don't tell me I don't understand not belonging." She paused, then added softer. "You made it feel like home here. You, not the view, not the furniture, you and Mira." A long breath passed between them. Caleb looked away. "Mira's gotten too comfortable. That's on me. I let her feel like this was more than a place to help someone heal." Evelyn's eyes welled. "Maybe it is. I don't want her to think we're something we're not," he said. "She's already lost more than most adults could bear." Evelyn stepped forward slowly. "She didn't lose today," she said. "She made something. She made us. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not forever, but it's real." She hesitated, then added, "You ever notice she hasn't made a red bead chain since the first day she got here?" Caleb's breath caught. Evelyn nodded. "You told me red means fear, panic. You know what she's made instead these last few days? Blue, green. Even yellow yesterday. That girl is trying to tell you she's home." He sank slowly back onto the couch, head in his hands. "She deserves more than this," he whispered. "She deserves someone who shows up," Evelyn replied. "And so do I." Later that night, the air between them was still tender. Caleb helped clean up the dinner plates while Mira quietly colored at the window lining her drawing with little blue dots, her version of the night sky. Evelyn placed a soft cotton pouch on the table beside him. "What's this?" he asked. "A trade," she said. He opened it. Inside was a harmonica. Old, worn, polished, but unmistakably his. He looked up surprised. "You fixed it. I asked someone at the music store to replace the reeds. They said it still has soul." Caleb traced the metal with his thumb. "I haven't played this one since before." "Then maybe it's time you teach me," Evelyn said. He blinked. "What?" "Teach me how to make it sing, how to hold a note without breaking it, how to listen to something that has no words." Caleb smiled faintly. You don't strike me as someone who waits long enough to learn an instrument. I'm learning, she said softly. To wait, to listen, to stay. She looked at him, her voice trembling but clear. So, stay, 1 more week. Teach me the harmonica. If at the end of it you still want to leave, I won't stop you. Caleb studied her face as if trying to read a sheet of music written in feelings he hadn't dared name. Finally, he nodded. Just 1 week, he said. Just 1 lesson at a time, she whispered. And from the corner of the room, Mira looked up from her drawing, reached into her bead tray and strung a tiny white bead onto a new thread. She smiled. It wasn't the color of fear. It was the color of beginnings. The harmonica felt heavier than Evelyn expected. Not in weight, but in memory. It was smooth in her palm, polished by time, warmed by stories, quiet now, but not silent. The kind of object that had lived through more music than words. She turned it slowly in her hands like it might whisper something if she held it just right. Across from her, Caleb was quiet too. Sitting on the floor with his back against the bookshelf, legs stretched out like he belonged there. Like this wasn't the penthouse of a woman who had once scoffed at a janitor on her doorstep, but just home. Mira sat cross-legged between them, quietly threading another bracelet. She wasn't watching them directly, but she wasn't missing a thing. "All right, Caleb," finally said his voice soft and gravelly. "Rule number 1. Evelyn looked up suddenly nervous. "There are rules," he smiled faintly. "Only one that matters. You don't force it. You breathe through it." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds very zen." He chuckled. "It's not. It's just truth. If you try to make the note happen, it breaks. But if you let it come through you, it sings." Evelyn nodded slowly, turning the harmonica toward her lips like it was something sacred. She blew gently. The sound was squeaky, like a duck stepped on a whistle. Caleb bit the inside of his cheek. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "If you laugh, I walk." He held up both hands. "I'm not laughing. That was just the harmonica, adjusting to your CEO energy." Mira giggled. A real delighted sound. Evelyn blinked, then grinned despite herself. "Well," she said, "I guess we both have to adjust." The lesson continued gently, imperfectly. Caleb showed her where to hold her hands, how to purse her lips, how to listen instead of just blow. His fingers brushed hers occasionally, not intentionally, but every time they did something in Evelyn's chest seemed to loosen, like a string tuned too tight finally slipping into harmony. After 20 minutes, she managed something close to a scale. It was clumsy, breathless, unapologetically human. She looked up. That was awful. Caleb shook his head. "That was you." She blinked, meaning he leaned forward. "You didn't copy me. You didn't try to sound like anyone else. You just played what you could. That's braver than good." Evelyn looked down at the instrument again. "I've spent my whole life trying to be good," and she met his eyes. "It's exhausting." He nodded. "Try honest instead." That night, the 3 of them sat on the balcony. Chicago shimmered below gold and cold and endless. Mira had brought out her newest bead strand, this one with 3 names written on little white tags: Mira, Caleb, Evelyn. They fluttered in the breeze like they were trying to become something more permanent. Evelyn held the harmonica again, tried another note. It came out wobbly but sweet. Caleb nodded approvingly. "You're learning." She glanced sideways at him. "You ever get tired of being right?" "Only when I know I'm not," he said, then added, "But I am right about this." Evelyn leaned her head back against the chair. "This?" Caleb's voice was steady. "You, Mira. This apartment. These nights." She exhaled slowly. "I'm scared. I know. I've never shared my space like this. Not even when I was married. Not really." Caleb turned toward her, his gaze gentle. "You don't have to explain." But she did anyway. Being needed. "That I understood, in boardrooms, on paper. I'm good at being useful, but being wanted, being chosen, that terrifies me." Caleb looked down at his hands. "I once asked Sarah why she stayed with me," he said. "She said, 'Because you see the worst in people and love them anyway.'" Evelyn swallowed hard. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that," she whispered. "I think you are," he said. "How do you know?" He met her eyes unwavering. "Because you haven't run. Not once." Mira fell asleep on a blanket at their feet, her beadwork draped across her chest like armor made of color and trust. Evelyn reached down, brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. "I used to think healing was something you did," she said. "A checklist. A program. Now I think maybe it's just having someone beside you while you figure out how to live again." Caleb's voice was quiet. "That's all I've ever tried to be." She turned toward him. "You are." The next morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of humming. Not harmonica. Just a human hum, low, warm, imperfect. She padded into the kitchen and found Caleb standing by the stove, flipping pancakes, barefoot hair still damp from the shower. She stared at him like he wasn't real. "Morning," he said. "You cook, I flip," he corrected. "Mira handles taste. I'm just the structure guy." Evelyn laughed. A real laugh, unfiltered. It startled her. "Wow," she said. "That felt illegal." Caleb handed her a plate. She sat, and for a moment the world was exactly enough. Later that day, Evelyn was in her office when Mira appeared silently at the door holding something behind her back. Evelyn looked up. "Hey, sweetheart?" Mira walked over and gently placed a new bracelet on the desk. It was made of 3 colors: soft blue cloud, white, and warm amber. Evelyn picked it up. "What does amber mean?" Mira didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her hand to her heart, then pointed to Evelyn. Evelyn blinked. Mira, nodded. "Amber means—" Mira took Evelyn's hand and placed it over her own chest, then whispered one word. "Stay." Evelyn's heart cracked open. It didn't break. It bloomed. That evening, she found Caleb by the piano tuning a string with the patience of a man who understood time wasn't the enemy, it was the tool. She walked over, sat beside him, held up the harmonica. "Tomorrow," she said, "lesson 2. He turned to her, something unreadable in his eyes. "No," he said softly. "Tomorrow." Pause. "Lesson finale." She raised an eyebrow. "Finale?" he smiled. "Because I think the song you're learning, it's not mine anymore. It's ours." Caleb had seen a lot of boxes in his life. Toolboxes, lunch boxes, moving boxes with dreams packed tight between duct tape and denial. But this one didn't rattle. It breathed. Evelyn handed it to him slowly. 2 hands, not one, like something delicate, something sacred. They stood in the living room, the early evening light pouring in behind her like a soft blessing. Mira sat quietly at the edge of the couch, her little feet swinging, eyes locked onto Caleb like she already knew what was inside that box. He looked at it for a long moment before speaking. "I didn't bring you anything." Evelyn's voice was steady but gentle. "You brought everything." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a small piece of cream velvet, was a ring. Not gold, not silver, not diamond. Glass. Smooth, round, and faintly colored, made from the melted fragments of the bead strands Mira had once broken in panic, and then gathered one by one. The soft blue, the amber, the green, the violet, all fused into one quiet promise, a mosaic of everything broken that had dared to become whole. Caleb blinked slowly. "You made this." "We made it," Evelyn said. "Mira picked the colors. I picked the shape." He looked down at the ring, then back up. I'm not a man who knows what to say in moments like this." Evelyn stepped closer. "That's all right. I'm not a woman who needs grand speeches." He swallowed. "You really want this. I want someone who sees people the way you do. Someone who lets silence sit at the table and still feels full. Someone who fixes what he didn't break, and never calls it a favor." Caleb's voice cracked. "Evelyn." She cut in soft but certain. "I don't want a man who'll save me. I want a man who'll stay." And then before he could reply, Mira got up and walked between them. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bead one Caleb hadn't seen before. Clear. Faceted. Catching the light like it knew how to hold it. She pressed it into his hand. "What's this one mean?" he whispered. Mira pointed at her chest, then at his, then hers again. Evelyn translated quietly. "It means home." Caleb's hand trembled. "I don't know how to be somebody's future." Evelyn smiled, slow, real, and almost shy. "Then just be there now, and if that turns into forever, we'll let it." That night, they didn't have a toast. No champagne, no violin quartet on a rooftop terrace, just pizza on the balcony, Mira in pajamas, and Caleb holding Evelyn's hand like it might still disappear. But it didn't. It stayed. Later, when Mira had fallen asleep on the couch with a beaded strand wrapped around her wrist like a dream catcher, Evelyn brought out the harmonica one last time. She turned it in her hands like an old friend, then looked at Caleb. "Still owe me that finale." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to hear it now?" She nodded. He pulled out his own harmonica, an older one scratched but well-loved, and for a few moments there was only breath. Then music. But it wasn't the mournful melody Evelyn had expected. This one was lighter, curious. It stumbled at first, just like she had, but then found its rhythm, found its joy. She listened in awe. "That's not the song you played before." "No," he said. "This one hasn't existed until today." He paused. "It's our song now." Evelyn smiled, her eyes glassy. "Can you teach it to me?" He reached over, placing his harmonica in her hand. "Only if you promise to change it as we go." She nodded, and together they played something new, imperfect, honest, beautiful. The next morning, Evelyn placed the glass ring back into the box. Not to hide it, but to protect it. It wasn't about display. It was about memory. She tucked it into her nightstand beside the photo of her and her mother, the one she'd kept buried for years. Now it sat beside something fragile that had survived fire. She ran her fingers along the edge of the velvet. "I don't need a diamond," she whispered to herself. "I just need something that remembers what it took to shine." That afternoon, as Caleb repaired a cracked tile near the back door, Evelyn stepped outside barefoot, holding 2 mugs of mint tea. "You're avoiding me," she teased. "I'm a janitor," he grinned. "We're experts in strategic disappearance." She handed him a mug. They stood in the breeze, the city moving around them like an orchestra with no conductor. "I used to think love was a transaction," Evelyn said. "Give this, get that." Caleb raised his cup. "And now," she smiled, "now I think it's just noticing. Noticing when someone's tired even when they don't say it, when someone's trying even if they fail, when someone's still standing when they could have chosen to leave." Caleb looked down, then back at her. "So, what are you noticing now?" She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That I'm not alone." That night before bed, Mira placed a new bead string on Evelyn's nightstand. All white. No color, just soft, translucent white. Evelyn picked it up, confused. "What does this mean?" Mira simply touched the string to her lips, then her heart. Evelyn exhaled, eyes burning. Caleb, from the doorway, translated softly. "She says it's the color of trust." The city didn't pause for their love story. It kept spinning. But somewhere in a penthouse where a butler never arrived and a janitor never truly left, a little girl threaded beads like they were stardust. And 2 people finally understood. You don't have to be whole to be chosen. You just have to stay long enough to matter. 6 months later, the sky over Maplewood shimmered with the kind of light that only comes after rain. The ribbon was soft blue, just like the beads Mira used to string. It fluttered gently in the breeze as she stood on a small wooden stage, clutching a pair of oversized scissors with both hands. Her white dress was simple, barefoot as always, but today her eyes sparkled with the calm steadiness of someone who'd walked through a storm and remembered how to dance in the rain. Beside her, Evelyn adjusted the microphone, heart thudding like it had 6 months ago when Mira had whispered her first word. "Ready, kiddo?" Caleb asked softly, kneeling beside his daughter. Mira nodded, then looked up at the small sign carved into the archway behind her. The Mirabelle Room, a sensory haven for every child who feels too much. The crowd, mostly parents, educators, and volunteers, stood in quiet anticipation. Some held tissue already pressed against their cheeks. Mira lifted the scissors and snipped the ribbon. A cheer rose. But Mira didn't flinch. She turned around and reached for Evelyn's hand, holding it like she'd been doing it her whole life. And Evelyn, who once thought emotions were weaknesses and children belonged in carefully scheduled corners, held on tight. Inside the center, laughter echoed off freshly painted walls in soft pastels. Kids ran across padded floors tracing rainbow murals with their fingers. Rooms were designed for everything from quiet retreat pods to textured play panels and weighted blankets in every corner. In the music room, a worn harmonica sat beside a row of shiny new ones, all labeled "Property of Mr. Caleb." "Play it again," one of the kids cried, tugging at his sleeve. Caleb smiled and brought the harmonica to his lips. He played a gentle tune, half lullaby, half wind, rolling through prairie grass. The children stilled. Some swayed. One closed his eyes and whispered, "That feels like Grandma's house." At the window, Mira sat on a stool next to Evelyn. They were threading beads together, tiny glass pieces salvaged from the broken chandelier that had fallen the night Mira had her sensory meltdown. "Should we use this one?" Next, Evelyn asked, holding up a shard of deep violet. Mira tilted her head, then carefully selected a yellow bead instead. Why yellow? Mira didn't speak. Instead, she touched Evelyn's cheek. Then pointed toward the porch where Caleb stood waiting, arms folded, the setting sun casting his silhouette long and warm across the wood. "Because yellow means home," Evelyn murmured, voice catching. Later, when the center had emptied and only their small family remained, they sat on the porch in silence. Mira dozed on Evelyn's lap, fingers still curled around the unfinished bead strand. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, harmonica in one hand, the other tucked in his jacket pocket. "You know," he said without turning around, "I never thought I'd be back here." In a real porch swing, with the smell of lemonade and somebody humming off key inside. Evelyn smiled faintly. "You thought you'd be alone forever." He turned now. "Didn't you?" She nodded. "I thought needing someone meant losing control, that love was a liability. And now?" She looked down at Mira, brushing a loose curl from the girl's brow. "Now, I think love might be the only thing that teaches us how to stay." Caleb came closer, his boots thudding softly on the porch planks. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small velvet pouch from his pocket. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Is it another harmonica?" He chuckled. "No, that's lesson 3. You're not ready yet." She opened the pouch. Inside was a ring, not gold, not diamond, not any metal that would show up in a catalog. It was a circle of fused beads, translucent glass pieces in every color they'd used together over the past months. Yellow, blue, green, violet. One was cracked down the middle, but it held. "I didn't make it alone," he said. Mira picked the order. "I just glued it together." Evelyn's throat tightened. She couldn't speak. "I know you can buy something shinier," he added quickly. "But I thought, if you ever want to wear something made from the things we broke and healed together." She didn't let him finish. She reached for his hand and slid the ring on her own finger. "I don't want shiny," she whispered. "I want real." Caleb nodded. "Then I guess we're really doing this." Evelyn leaned into him. Mira stirred slightly, then settled again. In the distance, a street lamp flickered on. A few days later, the ceremony was held right there on the porch. No tuxedos, no string quartet. Just Mira in a daisy crown, Evelyn in a pale blue dress, and Caleb in his nicest flannel. They exchanged vows with no script, no officiant. "Just this, I promise to stay when it's quiet," Evelyn said, "and when it's chaos." "I promise to listen even when there are no words," Caleb replied. Mira handed them the rings, and that was enough. That night, as stars blinked above the small house behind the center, Evelyn tucked Mira into bed. "Mom," Mira whispered clear as day now. Evelyn froze. She turned slowly, kneeling beside the bed. "Yes, sweetheart." Mira reached up and cupped Evelyn's face in her small hands. "Mom," she repeated and kissed her cheek. It was not a question, not a trial run, it was her truth. Evelyn wept into the girl's hair and whispered, "I will never let go." Outside, Caleb stood at the window, watching. Not through glass, but through the soft blue beads now strung across the sill. He pressed the harmonica to his lips, played the waltz he once kept locked in grief. This time it didn't ache. It danced. And in that moment beneath the moon and the window and the promise that love could be quiet and fierce and fully earned, they were finally home. And maybe that's what real love looks like. Not perfect, not polished, but made from pieces we choose to keep even after they've been cracked. If this story touched your heart even just a little, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, tell us your city, your story, or simply say hello. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories that heal, stories that remind us we're not alone, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Join our growing family of listeners from all over the world. There's always room on this porch for one more heart. From all of us here, thank you for watching. We're grateful you chose to spend time with us today. Until the next story, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in the beauty of second chances.